I'm an old woman now, older than I ever imagined I'd become. And yet, for all the years I've lived, nothing has weighed on my heart as heavily as the secret that festered in my own home. One my daughter-in-law hid with a kind of desperation I didn't understand until it was far too late. I carried the confusion silently, never knowing why I felt a shadow walking beside me, why something in my family didn't feel right anymore. But I would have never expected the truth to come from the softest voice in the house, my little granddaughter. She didn't mean to break anything. Children rarely do. But one whispered sentence from her tiny lips. It shattered the world I thought I knew. I still remember the moment as if it's happening right now. Her head resting against my shoulder, her hands covered in crayon smudges, her voice trembling just enough for my heart to catch. What she told me that day. What she revealed without fully understanding. Ripped open years of confusion, exposed lies I didn't know were lies, and pushed me into a storm I never wanted to enter. A storm that nearly cost me my son. Before I go on, if you love real stories shared from the heart, please subscribe so you never miss what I reveal next. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything began to unravel. It started with a feeling, nothing loud, nothing obvious. Just a quiet tug at the edges of my peace. I'd spent so many years building a loving home, raising my son, watching him grow into a man I was proud of. I thought, foolishly perhaps, that I had weathered all the hardest parts of life. But life has a way of sending storms long after you've put your umbrella away. My daughter-in-law came into our lives like a gust of warm wind. Charming, polite, eager to be accepted. I welcomed her. I truly did. I opened my arms, my heart, even my home when they needed help. But over time something shifted. A change so small at first I convinced myself I imagined it. She grew guarded. Not visibly hostile, not openly unkind, just hidden. She moved through the house as though every corner held a listening ear. She whispered when no whisper was needed. She hovered over her phone like it contained her soul. She flinched if I walked into a room unexpectedly. She watched me with an uneasy tightness around her eyes, as if she feared I would peel back something she was trying to keep sealed. I tried to ignore it. What mother wants to think her son's wife is hiding something? What grandmother wants to believe a shadow hangs over her grandchild's home? But the unease only grew. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and I was left alone with my thoughts, I could feel it. A secret. A heavy one. Something living behind every forced smile, every rushed goodbye, every moment she snatched my granddaughter away a little too quickly. Still I said nothing. I held my tongue out of love for my son. Out of fear of being wrong. Out of fear of being right. Then that afternoon. That innocent, ordinary afternoon that changed everything. My granddaughter had been drawing at the kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair, her face lit by the soft glow of the setting sun. She looked so peaceful, so safe, so untouched by the storms of adult life. I remember thinking how grateful I was for that. How desperately I wanted her childhood to stay pure. She paused her drawing, pressed her little hand against mine, and leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Too soft, too fragile, too serious for a child her age. Grandma, Mommy told me not to tell you something. And just like that, the world tilted. In that moment I knew without hearing another word, that whatever she was about to share would change everything. My breath stopped, my heart pounded, and every suspicion, every uneasy moment, every quiet fear came rushing back all at once. I wasn't ready for what she said next. I don't think any grandmother ever could be. But her words, her tiny, trembling confession, cracked open the secret my daughter-in-law fought for years to keep buried. And that truth, raw, painful, undeniable, nearly destroyed the bond one had spent decades building with my son. When I look back on my life, it's impossible not to start with my son. He was my pride long before he ever understood what pride meant. I raised him on my own after losing his father far earlier than we ever expected. Those were hard years. Quiet dinners, long nights at work, mornings where I packed his lunch half asleep. But he grew anyway. He grew into a thoughtful, gentle boy who always placed his small hand in mine, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone. I never remarried. Not because I didn't have offers, But because my heart was already full with the one responsibility I cherished more than anything, raising a good man. And I did. Or at least, I believed I did. He was in his late 20s when he met her. He was working long hours, tired half the time, drifting through life without much excitement. Then suddenly he came home one day with this glow about him, a spark I hadn't seen in years. I remember him standing in my kitchen with a shy smile on his face, saying, "Mom, I met someone." The way he said it told me everything. He was gone, fully, blindly, beautifully gone. He brought her over a week later, my daughter-in-law-to-be. She was polite, soft-spoken, almost timid. She complimented my cooking, asked about my garden, helped wash the dishes without being asked. I liked her immediately. She felt eager to fit in, to be accepted, to be seen as part of our family. I understood that feeling all too well. It made me open my heart to her even more. Their relationship moved fast. Too fast for some people, but I stayed quiet. My son hadn't been truly happy in years. I wasn't about to dim his light. They married within 9 months, and I remember standing at the back of the small ceremony wiping tears from my eyes, certain I was witnessing the start of a beautiful new chapter. For all of us. Then came the baby. My granddaughter. The joy of my old age. I held her the day she was born, tiny and wrinkled and perfect, and whispered promises into her soft hair. Promises to protect her, to love her with everything I had left in this world. For a while everything felt normal. Simple. We shared Sunday dinners. I watched the baby whenever they needed rest. My daughter-in-law seemed grateful, maybe even relieved, to have support. She often told me she didn't know what she'd do without me. And I believed her. But life doesn't reveal its cracks all at once. Sometimes they start as hairline fractures, so thin you barely notice them. You only sense a shift in the air, something fragile beneath the surface. The first crack appeared when my granddaughter was about 9 months old. I was holding her in the living room, bouncing her gently, when my daughter-in-law rushed in with an urgency that startled me. "I'll take her," she said too quickly, too sharply, pulling the child into her arms before I could respond. I laughed it off, thinking maybe she was tired or hormonal, or simply protective. New mothers often are. But something in her eyes didn't match her explanation. Another time, my son asked me to babysit while they ran errands. It was a simple request. I'd done it dozens of times. But when my daughter-in-law arrived to drop her off, she hesitated at the doorway, clutching the diaper bag to her chest like it contained something irreplaceable. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked. "She's been fussy." I told her I was fine. I reminded her that I had raised a child myself. But she kept circling, fussing over bottles and blankets, repeating instructions I already knew by heart. My son stood behind her, bewildered, giving me apologetic looks. Eventually she left, but not before checking the window twice as she walked to the car. It didn't feel like worry. It felt like fear. Over the next months, the changes grew sharper. She began hovering whenever I held the baby, her smile rigid, her fingers twitching as though ready to snatch her back at any moment. She kept her phone face down whenever she visited, and if it vibrated, she would flinch and quickly excuse herself to another room. She reacted strangely when I asked simple questions. "How is work? Are you sleeping better?" Innocent things. And yet she'd stiffen, give clipped answers, and then avoid me for the rest of the day. I could feel her pulling away, even though I couldn't understand why. It wasn't just me either. She was becoming more possessive with my son, interrupting him, finishing his sentences, keeping him glued to her side as though terrified he might drift too far. I saw the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes, but he never said a word. Whenever I brought it up gently, he brushed it off. "Mom, she's stressed. New job, new baby. Everything's just a lot right now." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the unease in my chest wouldn't quiet down. Then came the whispering. I'd walk into a room and hear her lower her voice mid-sentence. Or I'd hear rustling in the hallway late at night when they stayed over. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of her wiping her eyes before composing herself, and stepping out like nothing had happened. And there were the moments with her phone. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I accidentally knocked over a small stack of clothes. Her phone slid out from under a sweater, screen lighting up with a message preview. I didn't mean to read it. I didn't even have time to process what I saw before she rushed over, snatched the phone from the floor, and snapped, "Don't touch my things." Her voice wasn't just harsh. It was panicked. I apologized, even though I'd done nothing wrong. She didn't respond. She stormed off and didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. Little by little, the tension seeped into every interaction. Each visit felt shorter, stiffer. My son seemed torn between loyalty to his wife and worry for his mother. I didn't want to make him choose. I swallowed my concerns and hid the hurt behind polite smiles. But my granddaughter, she felt the shift too. Children sense things before adults admit them. She grew more reserved around her mother, more clingy with me. And that's what unsettled me most. A child should not look relieved to step into her grandmother's arms. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. That I was reading too much into nothing. That the world had changed faster than I had, and maybe I was simply out of step with it. But deep down, beneath all the excuses, a knot of dread tightened with every passing week. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deeply wrong it was. Not yet. Because the truth, the real truth, was waiting to break free from the one person my daughter-in-law never expected, her own daughter. The months that followed were some of the strangest of my life. Everything felt familiar on the surface. Family dinners, birthday celebrations, quick visits after work. But beneath that thin layer of normalcy, something unsettling pulsed like a second heartbeat. I lived in a house full of memories, yet I moved through it as if I were trespassing in my own life. There were moments when the silence felt heavy enough to crush me. It began with small things. Things you tell yourself don't matter. Things you try to ignore because acknowledging them feels like opening a door you're not ready to walk through. One afternoon, I discovered the first clue, though I didn't recognize it as a clue at the time. My purse was on the hall table, the same place I always left it when my son and daughter-in-law visited. Nothing unusual. But when I reached inside to grab my wallet later that day at the grocery store, I noticed 2 bills missing. Just 2. Not much, not enough to raise alarm. I told myself I must have misplaced them. I blamed old age, fatigue, forgetfulness. Anything but the possibility that someone in my own family had taken them. But it happened again. Then again. Not every visit, but often enough that I began carrying my purse with me from room to room like a nervous habit. It made me feel foolish and paranoid, but I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Another incident came weeks later. My daughter-in-law had left her phone charging in the living room while she went upstairs to change the baby's onesie. I was tidying up toys when I heard the vibration. A message preview lit up the screen. I didn't reach for it. I didn't have time. But I saw enough of the notification to catch the tone. Not a name. Not even a clear sentence. But the words "she can't find out" glowed on the screen before it dimmed. My throat tightened. My hands froze. And then she came rushing down the stairs far too quickly, snatching the phone off the couch as if she'd been running toward an alarm. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask if I'd seen anything. She just grabbed it with shaking fingers, muttered something under her breath, and tucked the phone deep into her pocket before hurrying into the kitchen. I stood there, gripping a plastic toy block so hard it dug into my palm, and asked myself if I had truly seen what I thought I saw. Or if my mind was spinning a story from shadows. But then, the behavior around my granddaughter changed too. The child who used to squeal and run into my arms started glancing nervously at her mother before hugging me. She would look over her shoulder when we played, her small eyes darting around the room, as if expecting someone to interrupt. The joy in her laugh became quieter, more restrained. She clung to me longer when it was time for them to leave, burying her face into my shoulder until her mother called her name a second, sometimes a third time. Once, when they were packing up after a visit, my granddaughter tugged on the sleeve of my sweater and whispered, "Grandma, I like it here." It was a simple statement, but the way she said it, the softness, the longing, felt like a message wrapped in innocence. My daughter-in-law overheard. Her face darkened. She stepped forward sharply. "We need to go," she said, grabbing her daughter's hand. "Now." My granddaughter looked back at me. eyes filled with something too heavy for a child to carry. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't forget the sound of her voice. The next clue arrived on a cold morning when I had offered to help them by watching my granddaughter while they ran important errands. I'd just finished cleaning up after lunchtime when I heard a crash from the front entryway. I hurried over and found the diaper bag tipped over on the floor. My daughter-in-law was kneeling, collecting things with frantic, jerky movements. But what caught my eye wasn't the spilled bottle or the scattered wipes. It was a small envelope sticking out of the bag, half crushed, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. When she snatched it up, her fingers trembled so visibly she had to steady herself against the wall. "You shouldn't sneak around," she snapped when she saw me standing there. Her voice wasn't angry, it was terrified. "I didn't sneak anywhere," I said softly. "I heard a noise." She froze, then turned away without apologizing, stuffing the envelope deep into the bag and zipping it shut with force. My son came down the stairs at that moment, cheerful and oblivious, asking if we were ready to go. She answered before I could, her tone too bright, too practiced, and steered him toward the door. Later that evening, after they'd left, I received a short text from him. "Mom, she's stressed. Please give her space." Space. As if that would fix anything. The distance between us widened. She canceled visits with vague excuses, sudden fevers, unexpected errands, last-minute schedule changes that seemed to appear out of thin air. When they did come over, she clung to my granddaughter like a shield, her arms wrapped a little too tightly, her eyes watching me with a flicker of suspicion I couldn't understand. The tension seeped into my son, too. He'd grown quieter, careful with his words, hesitant to leave the room even for a moment. He used to laugh easily, speak openly. Now he avoided eye contact whenever his wife was around, answering questions with simple yes or no responses. He smiled less. He looked tired. Always tired. One evening, I pulled him aside while his wife buckled their daughter into the car seat. I told him I was worried, that I felt something was wrong, that I sensed fear in the house, fear that didn't belong in a family. He shook his head. "Mom, please, don't start imagining things. She's just under pressure." "From what?" I asked. He didn't answer. He simply looked over his shoulder at his wife, then lowered his voice. "Just trust us. Things are fine." But the crack in his voice told me nothing was fine. My granddaughter began acting strangely around food, offering her snacks to me secretly, as if sharing something forbidden. Once she slipped a small toy into my hand and whispered, "Keep it. Mommy says I can't have it anymore." The toy was harmless, a small plastic pony, but the way she hid it behind her back made me uneasy. Then there was the crying. Children cry. It's what they do. But this wasn't ordinary crying. It was the kind of muffled sobbing a child makes when they're trying to stay quiet. The kind that pierces the soul. I heard it one evening when I dropped by to return a dish. Their front curtains were drawn, and I didn't want to intrude, so I just placed the dish on the porch and turned to leave. But then I heard her, the soft, trembling sobs of my granddaughter. And right after, my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp, strained, nearly breaking. "Stop. Stop crying. You're going to make it worse." Worse? Worse than what? I knocked on the door, heart racing. Everything fell silent behind it. My son finally opened it, eyes strained, smile forced. My daughter-in-law appeared moments later, brushing her hair back, her breath uneven. "We're fine," she said quickly, blocking the entrance. "It's bedtime." I knew a lie when I heard one. But I swallowed it. Because I didn't want to push them further away. Because I didn't want to lose my granddaughter completely. Because I still believed, foolishly, that whatever was happening was something we could fix. If only I approached it gently enough. But the truth doesn't bend to gentleness. The truth has its own timing. And it was choosing a small girl with trembling hands and frightened eyes as its messenger. The final straw came during a visit that felt unlike any other. My granddaughter had been playing on the floor while the adults chatted. My daughter-in-law looked especially on edge, checking her phone every few minutes, pacing the room like she was waiting for something to happen. My son tried to distract her, but she brushed him off. I was handing my granddaughter a stuffed bunny when she looked up at me with a seriousness far too mature for her age. "Grandma," she whispered, glancing to make sure her mother wasn't looking. I have to tell you something. Before she could speak, her mother appeared out of nowhere, scooped her up, and said they had to leave, right then. No explanation. No smile. Just pure panic. I watched them drive off with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. My granddaughter's face pressed to the window, eyes wide, hands against the glass as though she were reaching for me. That night, I knew the truth was coming. I could feel it in the air, in the quiet, in the heaviness settling over the house like fog. I didn't know what the secret was. But I knew it was big. I knew it was painful. I knew it was poisoning the people I loved most. And I knew my granddaughter, my sweet, observant, fearful little girl, was holding a burden she should never have carried. What I didn't know was just how much her next whispered sentence would change everything. The day everything finally cracked open was quiet. Quiet in that uneasy way that makes your skin prickle before anything even happens. My son had dropped my granddaughter off for the afternoon. He said they needed time to sort out a few things. He didn't explain further, and I didn't push. His shoulders were tense, his eyes distant. When he kissed his daughter goodbye, his voice trembled just enough for a grandmother to notice. After he left, the house felt unusually still. My granddaughter sat at the kitchen table with her crayons spread everywhere like a tiny rainbow explosion. She drew small animals, flowers, crooked houses. Things children draw when their minds drift somewhere peaceful. But today, she kept glancing toward the front door as if expecting it to burst open. I asked if she was hungry. She shook her head. I asked if she wanted to play outside. Another shake. Her small fingers gripped the crayon with unusual force, knuckles pale, lines scribbled instead of drawn. I pulled a chair beside her and tried to lighten the air with simple conversation. About school, her favorite cartoon, the new shoes she'd been excited about last week. She answered each question with the shortest possible response, her eyes fixed on the paper but not really seeing it. Finally, she set the crayon down and pressed her hand into mine. Her palm was damp. "Grandma," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." She leaned closer, so close her breath warmed my cheek. Her other hand curled into the fabric of my sleeve, holding tight. Her voice lowered into that same fragile whisper she'd used the day she first hinted something was wrong. "Grandma, Mommy told me not to tell you something." My entire body went still. I didn't gasp. I didn't rush her. I simply held her hand and waited. Because I knew every word she spoke had been trapped inside her far too long. She said I'd get her in trouble. Her lips quivered. And she said I'd get Daddy sad. Her innocence made the words hit harder than any accusation ever could. I took a steadying breath, fighting the shake in my voice. "You can tell me anything," I murmured. "I promise I won't let anyone be upset with you." She swallowed hard, eyes filling with a kind of fear no child should ever carry. She looked at the doorway again, then back at me. Mommy said not to talk about the people who come to the house." My heart thudded. "What people, darling?" Her voice shrank even further. "The ones who make her cry." The room blurred slightly at the edges. I steadied myself against the back of her chair, my fingers trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "She said I can't tell Daddy about them," she continued, "or he'll leave us. And she said I can't tell you because you'll take me away." Her face crumpled then, not in a dramatic way, but in a soft, heartbreaking collapse of emotion she'd been holding back for far too long. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her tiny body shake against mine. "It's okay," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe here." She nodded, but she didn't relax. Instead, she lifted her head and looked up at me with eyes too old for her age. "Grandma, Mommy talks to them when Daddy's not home. And she hides me in my room when they come. She tells me to be quiet. She locks the door." My breath left me in a single, stunned exhale. 100 small moments suddenly rearranged themselves in my mind. The frantic phone grabs, the whispering, the unexplained money, the exhaustion in my son's eyes, the fear in hers. And then she added, almost inaudibly, "I heard Mommy say she wished Daddy didn't find out. She said she'd lose everything." My hand instinctively tightened around hers. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was a rising tide of sorrow, disbelief, and a grandmother's fierce need to protect. I asked gently, "Sweetheart, who are the people?" She didn't answer right away. She fiddled with the hem of her shirt, the silence stretching in a way that made my chest ache. "Mommy calls them her friends," she finally said. "But they make her do things. She cries after they leave. And sometimes she tells me not to tell Daddy she bought something. She hides things in my closet." I closed my eyes for a moment. Everything inside me, every instinct honed by decades of life, motherhood, and intuition, told me this wasn't something simple. This was deliberate. This was dangerous. This was a secret wrapped in fear and shame so tightly my daughter-in-law had let it seep into the life of a child. "Grandma," she whispered again. "Did I do something bad?" I cupped her face gently. "No, sweetheart. You did something brave. And I'm very proud of you." Tears pooled in her eyes. "I don't want Mommy to be scared anymore." There it was. The truth not just about what happened, but about how it was affecting her. A little girl forced to absorb the chaos of adults. A child protecting a mother who should have been protecting her. I held her for a long moment, my heart pounding with the weight of everything she'd revealed. When she finally pulled back to continue drawing, I sat in stunned silence, staring at her small shoulders bent over the table. A secret had been living in that little house, one my daughter-in-law had buried under lies, fear, and manipulation. And my granddaughter, barely old enough to understand right from wrong, had become its unwilling keeper. I knew then that silence wasn't an option anymore. The truth was out. It had escaped through the only person pure enough to speak it. My granddaughter had broken her silence. And now, I had no choice but to tear open the truth my daughter-in-law had spent years hiding. When my granddaughter finished her drawing and settled into the living room with her toys, I stepped into the hallway. I needed air, just a breath long enough to steady the storm inside me. Her words echoed in my mind, repeating themselves like a warning I'd missed for far too long. "Mommy said not to tell you. The people who make her cry. She hides things in my room. She said she'd lose everything." Every sentence felt like a piece of a puzzle I'd been too afraid to assemble. Now that the pieces were in front of me, I couldn't look away. I leaned against the wall, trembling. My old bones felt suddenly fragile, not from age but from the weight of realization. My daughter-in-law wasn't just anxious or overwhelmed. She was drowning in something darker, something she had dragged her child into, something she believed would destroy her if discovered. And it was happening right under my son's nose. I returned to the kitchen, watching my granddaughter quietly hum to herself. Her innocence made the truth even harder to bear. Whatever her mother had been doing behind closed doors, whatever these friends were, whatever was being hidden in closets and exchanged in whispers, it had touched this little girl's world already. I couldn't let it go on. But before confronting anyone, I needed to understand exactly what I was walking into. So I asked carefully, calmly, without showing the panic rising inside me. "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling beside her, "when Mommy hides things in your room, do you know what they are?" She shrugged, coloring a bright blue sky on her paper. "Sometimes little bags. Sometimes money. Sometimes papers. She says not to touch them." She paused, her crayon hovering mid-stroke. "She gets scared when they fall." My stomach tightened. "Does Daddy know?" Her head snapped up. "No. Mommy says he can't know. She says he'd leave us if he finds out." And there it was, the core of her fear. I wrapped my arms around her, pressing my cheek against her soft hair. "You've done nothing wrong," I whispered again, repeating it like a prayer. But inside my mind was racing. My daughter-in-law's paranoia, the frantic phone grabs, the missing money, the emotional outbursts, the secret visitors my granddaughter spoke of. It painted a picture I didn't want to believe. I'd hoped she was simply overwhelmed, struggling silently with something manageable. But now I saw the truth clearly. She was hiding something serious. Something illicit. Something capable of shattering their family. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. My granddaughter napped on the couch, curled under a blanket I'd knitted years ago. I sat beside her, my hand on her small back, making sure she breathed evenly, peacefully. It struck me how much comfort a grandmother's touch can bring. and how much damage a mother's secrets can inflict. When my son returned that evening, he looked exhausted, but determined. He stepped inside, gave me a brief nod, then pulled his daughter into his arms with a force that suggested he'd been scared to lose her for reasons he hadn't yet admitted. My daughter-in-law wasn't with him. The absence hung in the room like smoke. "Where is she?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he lowered himself onto the couch, rubbing his temples as if trying to fend off a headache made of regret. "She stayed home," he finally muttered. "We had another argument." My heart clenched. About what? He shook his head. "She said she didn't want to talk. She started crying and locked herself in the bathroom. I didn't know what to do." His voice cracked on the last sentence. I waited, letting the silence settle so he could fill it if he chose to. And after a long moment he did. "Mom, is she acting strange when she's here? Be honest." I breathed in slowly, weighing my words. "Yes," I said softly. "Strange and afraid." He swallowed hard. "Afraid of what?" "That," I whispered, "is what we need to talk about." I hesitated, not wanting to break his heart before it was necessary. But then my granddaughter lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him with those same fearful eyes she'd shown me hours earlier. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mommy said I can't tell you." His face went pale. She clung to his shirt, trembling. "Mommy hides things. And people come. And she cries. And she told me not to tell you or Grandma." My son's breath hitched. Caught between disbelief and heartbreak, I saw his world tilt in real time. He held her tighter, rocking her gently as if trying to shield her from a truth that had already touched her life too deeply. "Sweetheart," he said, voice cracking, "what people?" She shook her head. "Mommy said not to say." His shoulders sagged with the crushing weight of betrayal, confusion, and fear. Fear for his daughter, fear for his marriage, fear for the truth he was suddenly forced to face. He looked at me, eyes shining with tears he was too proud to shed. "Mom, what do I do?" My voice trembled when I answered him. "You listen to her," I said. "And then we face the truth together." Because now there was no denying it. The signs weren't random. The tension wasn't imagined. The secrecy wasn't harmless. My granddaughter's revelation had lifted the veil completely. The truth, whatever shape it took, was no longer hidden in whispers behind locked doors, or inside a frightened woman's panicked movements. It was out, raw, painful, and impossible to ignore. And deep down, I knew what had to come next. A confrontation, a reckoning, an unearthing of everything my daughter-in-law had buried for years. Whether she was ready or not, I knew the moment my son left with my granddaughter that I couldn't wait any longer. My daughter-in-law's secret had seeped into every corner of their lives, poisoning the air they breathed. The truth was out, whether she liked it or not, and I couldn't let another day slip by while my granddaughter carried fear in her tiny chest. So after they drove off, I gathered my coat, steadied my trembling hands, and made my way to their house. The walk from my car to the front door felt heavier than it should have. Each step was weighed down with years of confusion, months of growing suspicion, and the fresh heartbreak of my granddaughter's trembling words. When I knocked, the porch light flickered like it, too, sensed something was about to break open. I expected hesitation, maybe anger. Instead, the door swung open immediately. My daughter-in-law stood there, eyes red, cheeks streaked with dried tears. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. She froze when she saw me. "Where's," she began. "They're safe," I cut in gently. "They're together. They're fine." Her shoulders collapsed. Relief washed over her face, but only for a heartbeat, before suspicion crept back in. A tight, anxious breath slipped through her lips. "Why are you here?" I stepped inside without waiting for permission. She didn't stop me. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn even though it was early evening. The house felt suffocated, like the walls had been collecting secrets and were finally close to bursting. "We need to talk," I said quietly. Her mouth twitched. "About what?" "You know what," I replied. She wrapped her arms around herself, backing toward the kitchen as though preparing to run. "I don't want to do this right now." "You don't have a choice anymore," I said softly but firmly. The truth is hurting everyone, including your daughter. Her eyes snapped up. What did she tell you? That she's scared, I said. That she's hiding things for you. That she's been told not to speak to me. That strange men come when my son isn't home. That you lock her in her room. She flinched like every word was an individual blow. No, she whispered, shaking her head. She wasn't supposed to. She's a child, I interrupted. A child shouldn't be carrying secrets that make her afraid to breathe. She leaned against the counter, gripping the edge until her knuckles turned white. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I said. Please. For a long moment she said nothing. Just stood there, trembling, not with anger, but with the sheer terror of being exposed. I did everything I could to protect them, she whispered finally. I swear I did. Protect them from what? She covered her face with her hands. From my mistakes. From my past. From things I should have handled long before I met your son. Her voice cracked, and the rawness of it sent a chill through me. These people, she continued, they're not friends. They're people I owed. People who don't let go once they have their hands on you. I paid them for years. I thought I could keep it separate from my marriage. I thought if I hid everything well enough, it would stay buried. But it didn't, I said. Her eyes filled again. No, it didn't. She walked to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair as though her legs could no longer hold her. She sank down, shoulders shaking. At first it was small, she said. Money I borrowed when I was younger. Stupid choices I made. People I trusted who weren't worth trusting. I was alone back then, no family, no future. I thought it wouldn't follow me. She wiped a tear with the back of her hand. And then I met your son, she whispered. And I finally had something to lose. The confession drifted between us, heavy and painful. You should have told him, I said gently. I know, she cried. But every time I tried, I pictured the look on his face. The disappointment. The anger. The fear. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I promised myself I would fix everything before she was born. Her voice wavered. But the people I owed, they didn't care. They wanted more. If I didn't pay, they threatened to tell him themselves. To show up at his job. To take my daughter if I didn't cooperate. I did everything they asked just to keep them away. And the hiding? I asked softly. The crying? The locking her in the room when they came? She looked at me through blurred eyes. I didn't want her to see. I didn't want her to meet them. I knew how dangerous they were. And the fear of me? I pressed gently. Her voice shrank. I thought. If you saw anything, if you suspected anything, you'd take her away. You'd tell my son. And then I'd lose everything. Tears rolled down her cheeks, dripping onto her hands. I'm not a bad mother, she whispered. I was just drowning. I didn't know what else to do. I stood there, torn between anger, sorrow, and the crushing truth that this woman, flawed, desperate, frightened, had been walking through life like a wounded animal cornered by its own past. I took a slow breath. You have to tell my son, I said. Tonight. Her eyes widened with fear. I can't. He'll hate me. He loves you, I said. But love cannot exist in shadows. It needs the truth. She covered her mouth, letting out a soft sob. I don't want to lose my family. You already are, I replied gently. Unless you face this. At that moment, the front door opened. My son stepped inside, holding my granddaughter's coat, his expression tight and unreadable. He looked between us, his mother, pale and shaken, and his wife, crumpled at the kitchen table. What's going on? He asked. My daughter-in-law's breath hitched. She stood slowly, as if preparing for execution. It's time, I said softly. She looked at him, her voice nearly breaking. I have to tell you something. And the truth that had been buried for years, hidden beneath fear, shame and desperation, finally surfaced, right in front of the man whose heart it threatened to break. The hours after her confession felt like a lifetime compressed into a single night. I stayed only long enough to make sure voices stayed calm, that no door slammed, that my granddaughter, who had fallen asleep in my arms, remained untouched by the storm unfolding just a few rooms away. When my son finally looked at me with tear-streaked eyes and said, "Mom, I need time with her," I nodded and left quietly, carrying my granddaughter's blanket home with me like a fragile reminder of everything at stake. The next morning, he came to my house alone. He didn't speak right away. He just sat at my kitchen table, his hands covering his face, shaking from exhaustion and heartbreak. When he finally lifted his head, I saw a man torn open, not by anger, but by the weight of realizing how much pain his wife had carried in silence. "She should have told me," he whispered. "But, God, Mom," she was terrified. I placed my hand over his. Fear can twist a person. It can make them hide things they were never meant to face alone. He nodded slowly. "She said she wanted to fix everything before it touched our daughter. She thought she had it under control." His voice faltered. "She didn't." There was no judgment in his tone, only sorrow. A sorrow I understood far too well. Life teaches you that love is not just the soft moments, the laughter, the warm dinners. Sometimes it's the heavy things too, the confessions that bruise the heart, the truths that force you to choose between walking away or fighting harder. He stayed for hours, talking through the mess of it all. The debt, the threats, the years she spent patching holes in a sinking ship, the shame she carried like a second skin. Every detail unraveled a story that made my chest ache. Not because she was innocent, but because she had been drowning long before any of us saw the water rising. "What do I do?" he finally asked. I took a long breath, steadying myself. "You protect your daughter. And you decide whether helping your wife up from this is something your heart can bear." He closed his eyes. "I love her." "I know," I whispered. "And love isn't meant to be easy, but it also isn't meant to destroy you." He left with more questions than answers, but at least the truth was finally in the open. Secrets rot the people who keep them. Lies twist families until they no longer recognize themselves. But truth is painful, yes, but it is freeing. Days passed before I saw my daughter-in-law again. When she finally came to my door, she looked smaller than I remembered, as if the confession had emptied her of everything but guilt. She asked if she could come in. I hesitated, not because I didn't care for her, but because I needed a moment to steady the grandmother in me who wanted to protect my granddaughter above all else. We sat at the table in silence until she found the courage to speak. "I didn't want you to hate me," she whispered. "I don't hate you," I replied softly. "But I needed you to stop hiding. Not for me, for her." Tears filled her eyes. I never wanted her to see any of it. "And yet she did," I said gently. "Children feel what adults try to bury." She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "I'm getting help," she said quietly. "Your son, he's helping me find people who can protect us. People who can make this stop." There was shame in her voice, yes, but there was something else too, determination. A willingness to fight. A desire to rebuild. And even though the path ahead would be long, even though trust would need time to heal, I saw something in her that gave me a small, cautious hope. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "For everything." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Be better. For your daughter. For yourself. For the man who still believes in you. That's all I ask." She nodded, tears falling freely now. And for the first time in a long while, I believed she meant every word. In the weeks that followed, the house felt lighter during visits. My granddaughter no longer glanced over her shoulder. The fear in her soft eyes began to fade. She laughed more, real laughter that filled the room like sunshine breaking through clouds. My son held his wife's hand again. Not tightly, not blindly, but with a cautious kind of hope that only comes after surviving a storm. And I learned something too. Age doesn't protect you from heartbreak. Motherhood doesn't end when your children grow up. And secrets, especially the ones kept out of fear, do far more damage than the truth ever could. But families can heal. Even broken ones. Even frightened ones. Even the ones held together by a thread. All it takes is a moment of courage, and the willingness to face the truth. If you enjoyed this story, and you want to hear more real, heartfelt stories like this one, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know.